care more for our kids' salvation than we should their right behavior. Point number 2, parents should be the primary caretakers over their children's souls. This was kind of a tough one. Even though the church offers plenty of help and encouraging and building up your child and feeding their faith, you ultimately should be the one who is the primary spiritual shepherd of your child. Not me, not Russ. You are the one with the most influence, the most pull, the most time in your child's life. So you should be the one who's their primary shepherd. Because the church can't provide enough time and care throughout the week to get your child the spiritual guidance and encouragement they need when they're facing the worldly ideas, philosophies, and temptations that they're going to come across when they interact with their peers and when they interact with the education systems of today. You need to be your kid's pastor. Point number 3, parents should raise their children in a Christ-centered fashion because, and only because, they love Christ supremely and they love their children sincerely. If you love Christ with all your heart, soul, and might, like this passage is talking about, then you know him to be the only all-satisfying thing in existence. He is greater than everything else, and if you love your children sincerely, then you'll want the best for them. And so if you love God and you know him to be the best and you love your children sincerely, you'll naturally want them to have God more than anything else. So this parenting style, while it might be difficult, should come naturally. It should flow out of your love for God and for child. So those were the 3 points I kind of tackled last week. And then after that, I gave a practical charge. I asked all of you to sit down with your children, if possible, no matter the age, at some point last week, and just have a brief conversation about their relationship and understanding of God and the church. Just sit down with them and have a heart-to-heart. That's what people call those things. And then after that, this brief 5 or 10 minute conversation, go and celebrate it with them to demonstrate that this was important to you and that you care for them. That this wasn't just some check it off the box type of duty, but this was something that you really wanted to do. Now, to those of you who were actually able to sit down with your kids, I don't know how old they were, but if you were actually able to sit down with them or call them on the phone and have that conversation, good job. Awesome job. If it went really well and your kid totally broke out in like Pentecost and they told you that they love you so much and they were so glad that you cared about their spiritual well-being and they were like totally strengthened in their faith, like a whole bunch, and congratulations if that was you. I think you were the only parent in this room whose child actually had a flame leap from their forehead. Good job. If you were of the group who did that and the conversation ended up being really awkward, or if you're of the group who think that the conversation is just going to be really awkward, like almost painfully awkward, good job still. I'm honest, there's no reason to expect a conversation about spiritual things in a context in which conversations like that aren't normally had. There's no reason to believe that it's not going to be awkward, okay? If you start talking about Jesus in areas that you haven't previously dropped J-bombs in, right, Jesus bomb, then it's going to be awkward. And if that's the worst thing about this, then that's perfectly okay. Because if awkwardness is the biggest issue, it's really easy to fix. Time and repetition. Just keep talking to your kids about these kind of things, and it won't be awkward after a while. And then you'll look back to this first day and you'll laugh at how horrible at being humans you were because of how awkward. I think it's funny. I like awkward situations. I'll try my best to make this entire sermon awkward for everyone. So, now, on a more serious note, if you had more than an awkward problem, if you talked to your kid, or if you knew if you talked to your kid that they would be legitimately opposed to having this conversation, I would want to give you congratulations even for trying. If this whole thing was a disaster and your kid didn't want any part of it, I still want to give you congratulations. Because even though you may not have been able to talk with your kid about spiritual things and their relationship with God, I think you might be able to learn a few things from their response. Your kid may be having doubts about Christianity. These are real things. These are real problems. Your kid may have some resolved issues with God, or maybe your kid has some repercussions after witnessing some traumatic event. Your kid maybe has something wrong with them inside. And maybe just this sitting down, having a heart-to-heart, let's talk about Jesus, wasn't what they needed at that time. But now you're getting closer to diagnosing the problem, right? If you want to fix the problem, what's the first step? Finding the problem. So I think you're getting closer to that if that was you. So congratulations, even though it was a total disaster. In this service, I emphasized a little bit last time, and I want to re-emphasize again. The things that I talk about can be applied to discipleship in a much broader sense than just raising kids who are currently living with you in your house. Most of us in this room probably don't have kids who are living with us in our houses. So what I want to encourage you is not to just listen to me and be like, oh, this isn't something I need to hear. I already did that. Check mark. I'm done. I raised my kids. The way you disciple other people, the way you deal with your grandkids, you can learn some stuff from this. And maybe your children still need you to have some input in their lives. I'm sure you still have some role in your adult children's life. Adult children, that's kind of a funny word, like jumbo shrimp. So I don't want anyone here to pull nothing from this sermon. That if you're a grandparent or if you're single and you don't even want to think about parenting yet, this could still be very important for you. And if real quick, if your relationship with your grown child is broken to the point that you can't have these kind of conversations with them, I just want to tell you real quick, this isn't the point of my sermon, but if it's because of a sin issue on their part or your part, fix that right now so that you can go and you can start parenting them, so you can do what God has commanded you to do. Because in this passage, God is telling us that we need to love Him with everything we've got. And He wants our children to love them, or love Him with everything they've got. And our responsibility is to be God's instrument in bringing that about in our children. So if we're letting our pride get in the way and we don't want to talk to our kids because they did something to us, or we did something to our kids and we don't want to apologize for it, we're letting our pride get in the way of God's plan. And that's not a good thing. So that was just one quick little tidbit. There's my 5 cents. Maybe your adult child needs assistance in their parenting. Maybe they didn't get a whole lot of this kind of stuff from you when you were raising them, but you want their kids to have it, and they want their kids to have this kind of stuff. So there's absolutely no reason that you can't come in and say, look, this is where I failed with you. Don't do that with your kids. Let me show you how I think you could do it better than I did. So, now, with that cleared, with everyone hopefully paying attention and not sleeping, I want to look back to our passage. In our passage, we see that the passage as a whole is not primarily designed to instruct parents. Actually, this passage is talking about a lifestyle, a full way of living and thinking that is reflected in the way we live our lives, and especially in the way we parent. So the core of Deuteronomy is not parenting, but loving God with everything you have. So if you're in here and you're not even thinking about parenting at all, I encourage you to look at the way I'm expounding this as it relates to parenting, and then look to your lives and think, how can I live my life in a way that's reflective of my love for God? How can I change the way I live? How can I alter? How can I reorient it so that it's pointing towards God? Because you see, the author of this passage, he does not define the Christian life as adding on something religious to your normal life. It's not. He doesn't say you add on, going to church on Sunday, or you add on Bible study. But he's saying your entire life, everywhere you go, when you talk, when you're sitting down, when you're walking, everywhere you go, your life is changed because of your love for God. It's not just something you add on top of it. And that applies to so much more than just parenting. So I encourage you to be thinking about that as well during this time. So now that I'm kind of done with that introduction, I want to get into some of the nitty-gritty of how Christ-oriented parenting might play out. I promised you guys to be more practical this time than it was last time. Last time it was kind of abstract. This time I wanted to give you some practical advice, as much as I can give you, as much as the Bible can give you. if I had to compress this entire message into one statement, it would be this. Parents, look at everything you do to raise your children. Everything you already do. You raise your children. Now begin to alter and reposition all of those things, everything, in a way that shows that you are clearly doing this with an intention of raising your kid to understand, fear, and love God supremely. That's if I had to shorten this message down into one statement, it would be that. Start changing everything you do. Look at everything you do and think, how can I make this Christ-centered, gospel-centered, God-centered? Now, that's a big task. That's a huge task. So I thought to make it a little bit easier to tackle, I'd break it down into 3 basic times or categories of parenting. And if you look at the sermon title, you might be able to guess it. Those categories are parenting in the high points, parenting in the low points, and parenting in the in-between points. Everything in between the high points and the low points. So I'll start out by going through parenting in the high points. So what do I mean by parenting in the high points? I'm talking about the times in your child's life when they just make you proud to be their parent. When they just shine like a shooting star. When they blow you out of the water, when they compete really well in some tournament or win a sports game or finally get a good grade in a class they've been struggling in. These are the high points. Or when you come home and they just decide to clean the entire house. Oh, sweet. Yeah, go parent. Parenting win. So how do you deal with your children in these moments of greatness? It's not really a hard question. I think all of you could answer that question pretty easily. None of you are clueless. What do I do when my kid's like that? You celebrate with them. You reward them. You're happy for them. Your response as a loving parent to your child's successes is naturally going to be celebration. I don't need to read the Bible to tell you that. It's just obvious. I don't have to tell you how you need to show your love and admiration for your children. You know how to do that, and you already do that. But the question is, how do we change this to be oriented towards Christ? How is this different for us than it would be for someone who's an atheist parent who loves their children? How is it different? So if we go back to Deuteronomy, we go back to our passage, I think we can find something that demonstrates, that somewhat resembles this high point and gives us some teachings. In verse 10 it says, I'll just read it for you guys. And when the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give you, with great and good cities that you didn't build, houses full of all good things that you didn't fill, cisterns that you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant, and when you eat and are full, so this is like good times, this is a high point, then take care lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. It's the Lord your God, you shall fear him, you shall serve, and by his name you shall swear. So this passage is talking about a high point in the Israelites' life, like the highest point they had, getting to the promised land. This is a great and awesome thing, and they would celebrate this naturally. Anyone would celebrate this, just like we celebrate with our children, naturally. But it's different for them. The thing that makes it different, the thing that makes it God-centered, is that they take care not to forget the Lord in the midst of these great times. It says, take care lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. The author of this passage is telling us that if we don't orient these high points towards remembering and worshiping God for them, then these high points can actually cause us and our children to become distanced from God. These could actually be bad things. Because, you see, these Israelites were about to reach this high point in their lives only because God wanted to give them that high point as a gift. Right? He was the one who brought them out of the land of slavery. And he did that so that they might love him and worship him more. That was the point of this. But ironically, some of the Israelites may have forgotten about God's role in their success. And then they come to the conclusion that they achieved all this on their own and that they are self-sufficient. They don't need God. I'm doing really well. I don't need God. So you see, the same thing can be said of the high points in our kids' lives. If we don't turn these towards God, it could actually lead for our kid to develop a pride that could distance them from God. That's not a good thing. So in order to prevent that, you need to make sure you acknowledge before your children that God is the ultimate response, or the ultimate cause of their success. So a practical example, your son Jimmy wins a football game, and you love Jimmy, even though he's an idiot. And you bring him to Steak and Shake for a celebratory dinner afterwards. You just eat, great job, Jimmy. And all you have to do to totally reorient this entire celebration towards God is just start out with a prayer. Just pray, God, thank you for giving our son, Jimmy, gigantic muscles and a thick skull, so that he can run over all of his opponents. He wouldn't have been able to do this without you. Thank you for providing him with this great victory. Amen. Boom. One quick prayer has changed the course of this celebration. Because now, when you're a secular parent, okay, when you're not thinking about God and you're just thinking about how awesome your kid are, you're worshiping your kid in their success. You're building them up in a way that they shouldn't be built up. But if you're a Christian parent, you're worshiping God for your kid's success. Your kid will understand, oh, this success isn't just about me, it's about God. That's what these good times are for. That one prayer can be hugely important. So when we're dealing with these high times, we need to remember that we need to be acknowledging God as the cause for these high points, so that these high points can bring us to worship of Him rather than distance from Him. I think, and one more thing about the high points, I'm concerned that a lot of us are not balanced in our preparation and celebration of some of our children's most important high points. So what I mean by this is, as parents, we care about some things that our kids do more than we care about other things, right? So we might be really focused on our kids' grades. We might be really, really passionate about encouraging and pushing our kids to get really good grades so that they can have these high points. And then we celebrate those high points like way more than we celebrate anything else. Like, oh, you won a football game? Who cares? But you got an A? Let's go! So we enjoy some high points more than others, and I'm concerned that we might enjoy some high points more than we enjoy the high points in their spiritual lives. And last Sunday, I kind of talked about this a little bit. We established that parents should derive their greatest pleasures from their kids when they see their kids demonstrate that they have a personal and unique love for God that's growing stronger every day. Right. That's where parents should derive their satisfaction, really, the most satisfaction at least. And when we look over and we see our kid belting out hymns totally out of tune with a lot of humming because they don't know the words, that's the high point. That's what we work for. And we should be spending a lot of effort and time pushing our kids to get to those high points. I'm just wondering, have we spent more time pushing our kids to achieve high points other than their spiritual lives? Because if you're pushing your kid to do really good in school, really good at the piano, whatever you're doing, that's good that you're pushing your kid to do that. But if you're not also pushing them to have faith, if you're not pushing them to love God, then you're showing your kid that you really don't care as much that they love God as you do that you care that they get good grades. We don't want to impart that message to our children. We want them to say, oh, okay, my parent cares about my soul more than anything else. So that's the high points. We celebrate with total acknowledgement that God is He's the one responsible for these high points. And we make sure that we're balanced in the things that we consider high points. We make sure that we know that the spiritual high points are the most important ones. So now going on to parenting in the low points. These are the more challenging times. The high points aren't really hard. You're just celebrating. You're not doing anything. It's all your kids, right? They're doing great. But these low points, I mean to describe the times in your child's life where they're doing exceptionally crappy. When your kid is either sinning or rebelling against you and or God, or when your kid is met with a circumstance that brings them extreme grief. something like clinical depression or the death of a loved one or a tough breakup. Those are big deals in kids' lives. I don't know why. So these moments, these low points, can actually be just as crucial, if not more crucial. I think these are probably the most important individual moments in parenting. Because it's at these low points that your kids are going to start changing. This is where change happens. So in talking about these low points when your kids are rebelling against you, when these kids are sinning, the way we discipline has to be oriented towards God. And before I talk about the way we discipline, just want to make sure that we're all on the same page about the importance of disciplining in the first place. It's very important. It is of utmost importance that we discipline our children. However that works out, however you discipline your children. I'm not giving you advice on what strategies are the best way to discipline. I don't know. I haven't tested them out. Looking forward to it though. It's okay. I'm drawing a blank. There's some parents today, and there were some parents back at the time of this writing who didn't discipline their children. I know I have a friend in middle school, and I don't know if you could call him a friend, more of like a neighbor. And his dad, to be honest, he was not a good dad. He didn't discipline him at all. This kid, he would sit in his room with his door wide open, and he would watch pornography with the speakers turned up all the way with his dad in the house. No correction happened. How can you love your kid and let them do that? That's wrong. That's gross. We need to be disciplining our children. Like, if you loved your kid and you saw them doing that, you would destroy their computer and ground them for 2 months because you loved them, right? Discipline is a good thing. And while that's worldly wisdom, that's also biblical wisdom. Proverbs 13:24. He who withholds his rod hates his son. He hates his son if he doesn't discipline him. But he who loves him disciplines him diligently. So this is kind of obvious knowledge, and it isn't explicitly Christian that you discipline your children. This is something that just happens. I just wanted to clear the floor with that because that's extremely important. But now how can we orient our discipline in a way that is pointed towards God? I think we can look to Ephesians 6:4 for an answer. Ephesians 6:4 says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." So we see here that we're not supposed to bring up our kids in the discipline and instruction of our own ideas, our own thoughts. We're not disciplining our kids just to obey our rules. We're disciplining them to obey God's rules. We're bringing them up in God's instruction, not in our own necessarily. We're preparing them for God. We're not preparing them for us. We're trying to get them to obey and serve God more than we are trying to get them obey and serve us. That's our goal. Because you see, children here, your children were God's possession for an eternity before you were born. They were God's possession far before they were your children. And just recently, a few years ago, God decided to let you babysit them for a while. So how does it change the way you parent, change the way you discipline your children when you treat them almost as if they were somebody else's children? Because they are somebody else's children. They're God's children. Imagine if a friend came up to you and gave you their kid and said, "I'm going to be gone for a few years. Can you take this kid and raise them to respect me for when I come back?" Does that change the way you discipline them? Do you treat this child differently if they were somebody else's than if they were just yours? You would be careful not to punish them out of anger on your part, because you don't want their parent coming back and their kid telling them that, "Oh, you were just mean to them all the time. Like you were just a mean person. You just spanked them because you could." You wouldn't want that to happen, because then their friend would not like you for that. Their friend would not be very appreciative, right? It changes the way, because you're now no longer focusing on raising this kid to respect you. You're preparing this kid to respect someone else. That's totally different. So if you want to reorient your discipline of your children towards God, begin to see your children as a temporary gift God has given you. And He's expecting you to prepare them for Him, not prepare them for yourself. And as I ended the previous section about high points, I'm going to end this section in a similar way. Are you being imbalanced in the things that you discipline in your children? How often have you lovingly disciplined your child when they fail to keep up with spiritual disciplines? Do most of us have we actually disciplined our child when they don't keep up with spiritual disciplines? We certainly do when they have bad behavior. But have we actually thought about correcting them when they aren't keeping in touch with God? Because that's really important. And we really want them to, and it's bad when they don't. So we should be disciplining them somehow, in some way. We should be correcting them on that. And I think that's something that's really easy to overlook. But again, we're preparing them for God, not for ourselves. And not even primarily to survive in the world. We're preparing them primarily to serve God. So the other low point, the other basic idea of low points in your kids' lives would be the type of low point when your kid is suffering from some external force that's causing grief to them. So this isn't them sinning against anyone. This isn't something that requires correction, but this is something like depression or the death of a loved one or a pet or a tough breakup. Even the small things that you think are no big deal and your kid is totally overreacting, those points when your kid is just emotional and just distraught. It's in these moments in your child's life that you have the best opportunity to pour the gospel into their hearts and minds. You see, because it's always the people who are broken and who know that they're broken that the gospel really speaks to. That's what it was designed for. That's who Jesus reached out to when He was here, to the broken. When your kid is seriously depressed after something that they're sure is the end of the world, you would obviously want to be there for them and tell them that you love them. That's what any parent would do. So I'm here for you. I love you. It's okay. I'll be here for you. But how do we change that comfort and that consoling? How do we change that to be oriented towards God? Well, I think we have to acknowledge when we're comforting them that we are not the one who's going to provide them with ultimate and lasting comfort. We're not going to be the one who ultimately helps them through their depression, through the hardest times in their life. Jesus is. It's the gospel that's really going to fix their problems. The gospel is the cure for their depression. And it might not end their depression, but it's what's going to make them be able to last through it. That Jesus died for them. That even though they're broken now, God has promised to restore them. God actually came and died for them so that He could restore them. That is the most hopeful thing you can tell your kids. So when you're comforting your children, when they reach these low points, which they will all the time, when a pet dies, when a goldfish dies, even something as small as that, this is a time which you can pour the gospel into their lives. That's when the gospel becomes not just some theological